Hi, it's Talbot Davis again, and as always, I'm really glad that you are gathering together in your grab and gather and grow groups, and that together we're talking about how is it that you can tell the difference between a mountain and a molehill in your life, and who better to tell us how to do that than Jesus himself through this series of insightful, penetrating short stories that he tells. And for this particular conversation, we're going to look at a story that we are calling Rock People and Sand People. And the story that Jesus tells about two men actually comes at the end of a rather lengthy speech or sermon that Jesus has just given in Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and 7, full of all kinds of incredible insights and brilliant words from Jesus. And he closes that sermon out with this story. It's in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. If you want to pull your Bibles out or your Bible is on your phone, wherever, have a look. And we're actually going to work our way backwards through the story. Because look at what Jesus says in verse 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine, meaning the words that I just was speaking in the sermon I just gave, and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. And the rain came down, and the storms rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. So this fella has built his house on a foundation of sand, which is deceptive, because in ancient Israel, the sand looked solid and it looked substantial, but when the rains came, it proved to be very, very flimsy. And I love how Jesus says that life falls with a great crash. Well, in contrast to the sand guy, there's the rock person. Look what he does. Verse 24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. And so you have these two houses, one built on sand and one built on rock, and the thing that they have in common is not that they're both houses, and not that they both have foundations. The thing they have in common is that they're both plagued by storms, the pressures of life, the unsettledness that comes over relationships, the disruption that can happen to all of us as we navigate this journey that is called life. And Jesus says that what you do in the calm has everything to do with how you do in the storm. And to help us unpack that and what that story means for people living today, we have our friend April Portress, who's the communications director here at Good Shepherd Church. So April, it is great to have you here. Thanks for joining in this conversation.
You're welcome.
And the story that we're looking at in Matthew 7, as I mentioned, comes at the end of a sermon that Jesus has given. And you and Mark, your husband, been married about 4 years and just bought a house.
We did.
That has to have a foundation.
It does.
But I would love to know, when you think of Jesus' words and Jesus' teaching, what kind of spiritual foundations have you all used as you have begun your lives together?
It was very important for us to set a foundation in the church, and that means prayer. That means worshiping together, and that means being generous and tithing to the Lord. So for us, praying together, praying out loud, both of us, because I think that's an area that we struggle with.
Yeah.
And worshiping together is very important for the both of us. So we both actually attend worship together. It's hard sometimes because I work at the church, Mark serves at the church, but being at the church, being together, that's very important for us to be able to digest the message, to digest how the music worship goes, and have something to talk about later on in the day or throughout the week.
And so it's not by accident that sometimes after you sing, I'll see you go actually sit next to your husband.
Right. It's a novel concept, really.
Yes. Maybe you like each other.
Right, we do. Yeah. And also generosity, that was very important to us right from the start, is to set up to tithe, and to tithe a full tithe, because I think before it was just sort of an afterthought. It was
a convenient tithe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whenever the balance was good in your checking account. But now it's very important. We actually have a weekly draft set up, and it's that It's a sacrifice, absolutely, to tithe, but it's really been important to us to set up that routine and that habit of generosity from the beginning.
And it sounds like you haven't missed what was never yours to begin with.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've learned that we don't need as much as we think we need. Our dependence on money has significantly decreased.
Goodness.
Yeah.
So these great sort of foundational, building on rock and not sand stuff of praying and worshiping and giving. And so what I would love to know is, how does that kind of foundation, how has it helped you navigate life storms? Because the thing we saw in the story,
right,
both houses had storms. How's your foundation helped you navigate them?
I think it's helped us to realize that there are going to be storms. And that's something that we have to acknowledge. There will be storms. Things are not easy. And within the first 4 years of our marriage, we dealt with death of a parent, divorce of parents. We dealt with death of multiple family members. And I think for someone who didn't have a strong foundation and a strong faith together, a faith in God, it really would have rocked the marriage, and would have probably made us both either very bitter people or very angry people, angry at each other, angry at life. But I think having those foundations set up enabled us to realize that when we're in our moments of weakness, that's when God shows us his strength. And we've learned to depend on God, and he helps us bring closer together. So, I've fallen more in love with Mark because he's become that strong, sort of silent, just shoulder to cry on when I'm upset. And he's learned to depend on me for some of the things in my character that have become more apparent throughout this time. So I think as both of us have learned, life's going to happen, things are going to happen, and we're not, life, it sucks sometimes, you know?
Yes.
But because we both have made a very intentional effort to set our faith in God and grow our faith together, we really have seen a tremendous growth as a couple as well.
Yeah. That's such a great word. And so the storms came, but there was no great crash and no great fall. There was instead a growing stronger. And I love that you said that you're more in love now than you were when you got married.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's only been 4 years.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine.
Wait till you get to 34.
I know.
That'll be just crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And as you move into your conversation in your grab and gather and grow groups, as you tell the difference between a mountain and a molehill, I just ask that you begin these conversations by talking about what are the habits and the practices that you're doing in the calm that will determine how you do in the storm. Have a great conversation.